Hello, I'm John Powell. This oral history interview is being recorded on November 16th, 2009, and our subject is Bert Grover, who served in the State Assembly from 1965 to 1974 as a Democrat from Shawano, and has an illustrious career other than that. State Superintendent of Public Instruction, been superintendent of 2 local school districts, 17 years on the Board of Regents, so we've got a lot to cover here. Born in Shawano High School. Tell us a little about your early life and how and why you got into politics.
Well, I was actually born in St. Agnes Hospital, Fond du Lac, Wisconsin, and spent my first year with Eden Irish. Then my dad moved to Shawano, had a little paint and hardware store, and I grew up in Shawano, graduated from Shawano High, and then went on to St. Albert College, graduated there. Then I went to work for Senator Proxmire in Washington, D.C., and picked up my master's in international relations from American University, and realized that I didn't have much of a future in the diplomatic corps. I was too outspoken and too frontal. So I came back to Wisconsin, ran for the legislature, got elected, picked up my teaching certificate at Stevens Point, my doctorate at Madison. When I was in the legislature, I mean, what are you going to do at the end of a legislative day? You may as well go to school as opposed to sit in the front in the park motor inn.
Working on a dissertation while you're legislating all day and trying to keep up a legislative thing?
It took 3 years to write that dissertation, because just about the time that you had everything organized, you were up for another election, you had to drop everything. And I can remember Bruce Belliquin, a state representative from around Chippewa Falls, stayed in the same apartment with me. And I came back one time and he disassembled my papers and wrote his master's thesis around my proposal, but it worked for him, so it took me a while to get it all reassembled.
So, and how did you get interested in politics?
Well, I was always interested in politics. I can remember when I was just a little tyke, we lived across from Shawano High, and the Republicans were having a presidential primary, and it was Harold Stassen, the boy wonder governor of Minnesota, Robert Taft, the great conservative from Ohio, and Eisenhower. And I went over to that gym and I listened to, it was Robert Taft, and he gave a fine speech, and when he walked out of the entranceway, I touched him just to say, I touched Robert Taft. See, little did poor old Taft know that I ended up quite a liberal.
You're a Democrat, but
yeah.
Anyway.
But and my grandfather, Dr. Joseph Hargrove, who was an educator and started at Tigerton High School and Manawa High School, and then went to Marquette Medical School, and age of 44 graduated medical school and practiced rural medicine in Eden for 33 years. He had served in the legislature one term as a Jeffersonian Democrat from rural Fond du Lac County, ran for Congress once, and I stayed with my grandfather during the Second World War because my Uncle George is in Germany and my grandmother was dead, and my Aunt Naomi from South Carolina stayed there, and she was afraid of thunderstorms, so I stayed there as a 7-year-old during the summer to protect her. And my grandpa talked politics. He could name every president in their cabinet, and you name it. He was a Jeffersonian Democrat. And he served, at the one term he served, Paul Alfonsi, who I served with, was the youngest person to be elected Speaker of the State Assembly and served with my grandfather. And if you look in the Blue Book, Paul Alfonsi is really proud because he's the first Corsican that was ever elected to the Wisconsin legislature. So I served with Paul.
He was a Democrat from Milwaukee.
Paul was a Republican. He was from up north, Hayward, Minocqua, Eagle River, that area, but a progressive Republican. You know, there was a great split when I got to legislature in '65. You had the Warren Knowles and Bobby Knowles and Tiny Krieger and Walter John Chiltz and then Paul Alfonsi. There were heavy residual of the La Follette progressives that entered the Republican Party. Democrats got more than their fair share. But these people were all temperate, Paul Hassett's, moderate, traditional Wisconsin progressives. So the Republican Party had a strong streak of that character. And so it was a different time.
So Alfonsi recognized that you were the grandson of someone he served with?
When I told Pell Alfonsi about my grandpa, he remembered my grandpa. And when I had my dissertation proposal and my instrument that needed to be filled out, which required a survey of all the legislators, Paul Alfonsi took my survey instrument to every Republican, and he was one of the leaders in the Republican, and said, "You must fill this out." And he insisted. He personally delivered every one of those to me. Now, I'd like to think it's because he continued to have a love of education. He was in education for a while as a business ed teacher. But it might well be that that was their way to get rid of Grover, get him out of here with it.
Help him get his PhD so he
get
goes
the seat
somewhere
back.
else. But so you surveyed the legislature.
Yes.
What was your dissertation then?
No, that was my master's thesis, Origin, Concept, and Development of the United Nations Visiting Missions. My master's thesis was the effectiveness of the educational lobbyists versus the non-educational lobbyists in the 65, 69, 71 biennium of the Wisconsin legislature. And
a survey of the effectiveness of lobbies.
Right, and we developed characteristics. That instrument translated into 2 or 3 other dissertations off of it, and we tried to measure the standards by which educational lobbyists were deemed effective versus non-educational lobbyists.
And what did you find?
We found that the educational lobbyists had a narrower band of singular responsibility, but their modality for operating, that was before WA. It was the Hank Weinlich days, before Morris Andrews, where the teachers were in a union. And they didn't throw big bucks into campaigns. And in fact, the school administrators and the teachers were still part of the same organization in those days.
The old NEA.
Yeah, and so, yeah. And so when the educational lobbyists came to the legislature, they had to stand on moral rectitude and common sense because they didn't have the inner workings and the political machinations that the private highway contractors or bankers or insurance lobbyists could generate. So in fact, I think that oftentimes affected who wanted to be on the education committee. I did. I got
you
there.
Get more contributions if you're on the highway committee.
Yeah, you better be on the banking committee because there weren't too many contributions coming out of the education committee. But I fought to get on that committee because in those days you only had about 10, 11, 12 really formative standing committees. Now everybody's got a committee. Education committee for higher ed, education committee for Milwaukee ed, education committee for rural ed, education. We just had one education committee and you fought to get on it, so that the standing committees had a heck of a lot more influence than they do today. Today it's all in joint finance, in porkery, porkero, porkerari. In those days, so those committees had stature. And when they spoke to the rest of the legislature, the recommendations carried some weight. And I just liked the subject, and I got on that education committee, and just I think it was 1967. And I remember Bill Call, a state superintendent, came over, and he's a saintly, wonderful, good man. But in those days, the school superintendents picked the state superintendent. Now the teachers do. And Bill was talking about school aids and the department's needs, and I was asking some question about, foster home care or health care, nutrition for children, no opinion. And I remember I got a little intemperate and said, "Okay, you kick DPI is like a rabbit. You kick it, it doesn't even squeal." And I remember Jim Azum, a wonderful Republican legislator that died from kidney failure. He said, "Well, that is very rude and inappropriate for Mr. Call." And it was. But I thought in that moment, I think the role of state superintendent should be much broader than that. Who advocates for children? They can't vote. They can't determine what they're conscripted to. And the condition of children in our schools is broader than the scope of the curriculum and the quality of the staff. It's where'd you come from? What's the condition of the community? What's the condition of the family? How have you been nurtured and raised? And they missed the ball a little bit in Milwaukee on that issue. What's the difference between who shows up at the schoolhouse door in Whitefish Bay and Milwaukee? What's the condition of the family? What's the advocacy? What's the nurturing? What have the children seen? How is their health? All of those things have to be addressed if those kids are going to compete with some residual of affirmation, love, and expectation that comes out of the traditional normative cloistering of people called family.
Now, at that time, you're talking about the 60s, the state superintendent basically campaigned among school administrators.
Right.
It was kind of a low-key.
Yes.
I mean, it was on the ballot,
Yeah,
the
right.
general election ballot, but it was so low-key. So you campaigned among, at that time, other
No.
administrators.
Well, that's it. The school administrators got together, but Grover got that changed. I thought, well, anybody can run for a local school board. It might well be that the best educator in Wisconsin is a teacher. I mean, there's 60,000 of them. There are only 400 and some school superintendents. And the requirement was that you had to have a school administrator's license to run for state superintendent.
Oh.
Lee Dreyfus was an educator. He couldn't run. And I thought about that, and so I put that through the legislature and got it changed. Thank you, Pat Lucy. And it said that you didn't have to have a school administrator's license to run, that anyone could run for state superintendent of public instruction. Everyone thought that Grover was trying to, gild his own lily, because I didn't have a school administrator's license at the time, and I just picked up a teaching certificate, and I was working on my doctorate, and they thought I was trying to change it so I could run. But no, when you think about it, it's a constitutional office. It's nonpartisan. I think that's a real weakness. You may well, if you go over to the legislature and you're nonpartisan, you're awful tepid. Who are your friends? What authoritative domain do you have? What kick is in your statement? It's kind of like how many legions does the Pope have? And I think the office, if it's going to be continued to be elected, we ought to run them partisan. All the other constitutional offices are run it Democrat or Republican. Let's see who stands for what. And so that at least you go over there. Now, right now, since I've left, it's been largely you're sure that the teachers can get you through the primary, and most likely the general, and most likely the state superintendent has overwhelming Democratic credentials in this state. Well, that's okay. Then the governor's calling the shots. But you hope that your party's in control of the legislature. If you're elected by as a Democratic person, at least if not in name and in fact, and you go over to a Republican legislature, can be pretty lonely. So it seems to me that if we're going to develop the cleavage and the pronouncement and the understanding of what candidates for that office stand for, well, let's see what the Democrats stand for, what the Republicans stand for. I mean, can you imagine what this next legislative session is going to be like when we're talking about 66% school aides? Can you imagine the wailing and gnashing that's going to take place in this state, as there's going to have to be massive retrenchment? Who's going to prioritize that? Who stands for what? So I think greater definition come out of that office is in the public interest.
As we speak, the legislature quite a few years ago made the promise of the state paying 2/3 on average of school costs. That on average is kind of a hook too, because some districts get much more and some a lot less. But that promise is becoming, well, in fact, they did renege on it a little bit this last session, I believe, because of the economic, the state budget's in terrible shape. So that's what you're talking about. Next time around, it's going to be.
Well, when you look like me, you got to be humble. But I think a speech in the Park Motor Inn, and I said 66%, and old Tommy Thompson picked her up, and it was 66%. It wasn't too scientific. But in those days, we had rolling thunder. You had budget surpluses, $500, $600, $700 million. Just to keep it at 66% takes $500 million new dollars in each biennium. But Tommy had the luxury of all of the growth. I remember Jensen the old speaker called him a liberal for the way he was spending money, but he was able to accomplish that. But and you know, when I got to the legislature in '65, we didn't have offices in the cap. Well, no, that's the first time we had offices. We had 7 of us in a couple little rooms, 1 secretary. I remember us being gathered by the Legislative Fiscal Bureau, headed by Earl Soxy. He had a mustache, a little potbelly, looked a little English. He got up and lectured to us like we were school children about the school aid formula and the virtue of it and the efficacy of it and the morality of it. And if you voted against that school aid formula, you were violating basic precepts and norms of an equitable democracy. I believed that. And man, I was voted for that school aid formula. I didn't tinker around hold harmlesses, and if your enrollment's going down, you get something. If your enrollment's going up, you get something. And I always voted for that thing because, man, I was instructed, you know, it was like the 11th commandment. And regardless of its impact on my school districts. But the point is now the thing is so politicized there that I remember one time, one session, they just took $200 million out of the school aid formula and put a flat property tax relief thing out there separate so they take care of Waukesha County and some of the other counties. Theoretically,
where they got very low school aid.
Very low school aid, so they got a different stratum of property tax relief. But if the school aid is fairly pure, and it isn't because of all the politics today, people don't ascribe to the common good, it's for the personal good. If the school aid formula, if those that spend at the same rate will tax at the same rate. Anybody disagree with that? So Mercer has $75,000 worth of property on each kid at one time. And up in Door County, Gibraltar, whatever is at the peak there, very few kids, all that rich property, they had $1.5 million worth of property behind each kid. If you laid 6 mills on Gibraltar, they couldn't spend it at all. If you laid 6 mills on Mellon, they couldn't open their schoolhouse doors. And education is a function of the state. And the state superintendent, most of all, should always be out there on the point on equitable opportunity for all children, regardless of their zip code. And that's all been lost in the politicization of the Wisconsin legislature. In the old days, we weren't perfect, but at least a few of us ascribe to that.
Well, now we just had cutbacks with the last budget. We're sitting in Madison, of course. Madison got a huge hit in state aid. And many people, almost everybody, is now saying the school aid formula is fatally flawed. We've got to find a whole new way to start from scratch funding schools. How possible is that? And if you were the state superintendent with dictatorial powers, how would you structure?
Well, the state superintendent's office is way too weak. Well, education is a function of the state, and the state superintendent's constitutional office. They got to have substantial powers to go out there. And if, I mean, at one time we had 45 high school districts didn't offer foreign language, but we had the 20 standards, and I went out and enforced those, and then guidance counselors. And having said that, the school, don't tax me, don't tax thee, tracks the fellow behind a tree, right? Mm-hmm. And so the way we support our government today is largely on homeowner property tax. County, vocational schools who tax like mad, and you don't, with unelected boards. School districts, we have so many exemptions. I mean, the farm exemption is like 12, 15 billion.
The farmland tax
right,
exemption.
Yeah, if you understand how that thing works, man. Up where I live, a few people, if you've got good farmland or farm forest land now, you don't pay a lot of taxes. So we shifted it on the homeowner, and the homeowner right up against the wall. And then the county's tax and the city's tax. And they kept milking that cow, and there's M&E exemption for manufacturing machinery and equipment, which I helped put in when I was a member of the conference committee on the budget way back when. I've come to but you see that takes political courage. We need to, I think maybe we should not finance schools anymore off the property tax because it's so inequitable. Tax incremental financing districts and there's so many weighted inequities that have been inserted into the formula that it has no equity, and increasingly the homeowner is uniquely burdened. Maybe we ought to assume that, and I voted against, I voted against one of Knowles' budgets. I served 3 terms of Warren Knowles, and I voted for 2, and he's Republican. But one was on the sales tax. So maybe you need to revisit that formula, and the basic funding mechanism for local schools will come from the loopholes closed in the sales tax in the state. They're massive. You don't tax seamen, you don't tax hairdressers, you don't tax legal services, you don't tax.
Well, it's largely taxing goods and not services.
Right. But I would tax beautician services, I'd tax legal services, I put the sales tax on it all.
How about medical services?
Yeah.
Tax them?
Well, why not?
Well,
Warum nicht? That's what the Germans say. Well, when are you going to, start, let's run the exemptions.
Well,
now,
that's
farmers
the
don't want their Siemens
yeah.
tax. I bought a tractor here a while ago, paid $1,000 sales tax. Farmer next door doesn't. I plant trees each spring. I pay 5%, 6% sales tax to the state for the purchase of those trees. You're a farmer? You don't. License on your truck? Wow, come on. And we reverse that thing, and we just have a formula that will generate a certain amount of money based upon some statistical average, and then you're going to have to weigh in some multiplier for a high incidence of impoverishment, although if you understand the number of kids that are now free and reduced lunches, 28 family of 4 free, 40 family of 4 reduced. My goodness, even Madison's having trouble. So the point is, and reduce it and get that broad general tax which says everybody must contribute to the education of the next generation, regardless of wealth and disposition. And then use the property tax differently, putting some severe restraints on local units of government and how they can do it, and allowing just a smidgen of property tax exercised by local school boards to fill out the difference in cost of living stuff living out.
Yeah, well, one of the arguments is that if the state takes over all the costs, the local school districts will have no power and just be bookkeepers.
Well, what is Arnie, the state's national Secretary of Education, saying? I mean, tell you what, we got 424.
Arnie Duncan, the current secretary.
Yeah, well, we have 424 school districts all doing it their own way. I mean, at one time we had a study of, when I got to be state superintendent, of how many minutes kids were in school for a year. And based upon the school calendar of the different districts, multiply it by 12. Just, when you send the kids home, when you pick them up, some school districts had kids in class 2 years less than others in Wisconsin.
Wow.
Nix sehr gut. And, you have some, you can take Nicolay Union High, that has 8 foreign languages and Chinese Mandarin, and you had some that had no foreign languages. And I thought, to some degree, out of the wholeness of the pride of Wisconsin, that no child would be given such an inferior education that he or she would enter the post-secondary condition in such a defaulted condition they couldn't keep up with kids from more privileged districts. Well, I want to tell you there's a lot of difference between what's offered in school districts for kids. Now, I was fortunate enough to be superintendent of Winona Grove. In those days, a lot of university professors, civil servants. In fact, when I got there, I had 3 annual meetings I went to, and one of the problems was to keep the people from spending too much. And that isn't a problem anymore, but and our kids graduated from Winona Grove. Good school. And our kids were like their old man, a bee. and they were not genetically superior, but they had such good coursework. They all, I think, did quite well.
Now, Monona Grove was a suburb of Madison.
Yes.
Fairly wealthy. Before that, you were superintendent at Niagara.
Right.
The contrast between them was?
Well, the contrast was interesting. When I got to Niagara, the previous superintendent hired all the teachers from northern Michigan. And for some reason, he had a really nice faculty. Now, I did all the exotic stuff, building buildings and getting grants and all that. But he had a really great faculty. The trouble with a small district like Niagara was 60 kids in a class in high school. You got one English teacher for 4 years, one math teacher for 4 years, one science teacher for 4 years, one social studies. If you got one bad one, it's a little tough. And that's the advantage. Conant said that the ideal, former president of Harvard, said the ideal high school is 500. You have a comprehensive curriculum, everybody knows everybody, it's personal, it's cost efficient, and it's empowering. And so that's why I got to Monona Grove, and that was just the right size based on Conant's standards. And so our son took all the advanced placement courses and the college-bound courses, and he went to Stevens Point in paper chemistry, started 120 graduate 4 years later, and a little boy from Niagara, a classmate of him, he went there too. But he didn't have all those advanced placement courses. And my son went there and he almost ducked. He was so afraid of all the chemistry and all the math. 156 credits of it. I said, give her a kick. He was repeating some of the stuff he learned in Monona Grove his freshman year. And the kid from Niagara never had it. He ended up graduating, I think, from UW-Milwaukee. So the state superintendent is constantly going to travel the state and worry about the equity and the opportunity. Those children are not placed there of their own will and disposition. Their parents live there, and you would constantly have to worry about the floor. And the local school boards can worry about the ceiling. If you want 8 foreign languages, fine, but at least one. See? But the modus in Wisconsin is kind of like, have a weak office. Don't tell us what to do. After all, we'll have to cut the sports program if you guys go after our budget. All of that stuff is coming to a halt right now in this next biennium. You mark my word. And you need a state superintendent that is strong and not afraid. One time, DeSoto over there near La Crosse was giving her trouble with meeting the 20 minimum standard. We helped them. We sent people out, and they wouldn't do it. So I just happened to make a speech in La Crosse, said I wouldn't put my kids in the DeSoto school district. Superintendent got fired, and he should have. And you need someone that owns the whole condition of opportunity in education for children. That should be the state superintendent. That's why we elect the state superintendent. Let's not do it. We're the only state in the nation that has a state superintendent without a state board of education. So, where's the beef? Well, I'm talking a little too much education.
Well, that's one of your strongest backgrounds. I wanted to talk a lot about education.
It's been my life.
The sales tax. This is one of the plans. Take schools off the property tax so that only services directly related to property are on the property tax.
It's sehr gut.
And then shift it to the sales tax. This has been a plan many people have floated for many years, either raising the sales tax by a penny or, as you say, eliminate those exemptions, which is politically impossible, isn't it?
Well, I don't know. I think our democracy is in such fragile condition. We're going to have a great come and get it day here shortly. And you make the point, the education of children does not benefit property. It benefits the whole condition of the skills and aptitude of a new generation of people that can compete in a global economy. Police and fire protection and these kinds of things, and sewer and water, they benefit property. Ought not they more directly tax property? And ought we not have a broad tax that deals with our social contract, all of us contributing to the renewal and the education of the next generation? So I'd be very much for that. But it's so painful to watch today's legislators. Every one of them's problem. I'm going to get rid of the inheritance tax, sales tax, income tax, inheritance tax, and we're going to have good roads and good schools, and we're going to have good police department, fire department, nice roads, and the people buy that stuff, and it just turns my stomach out there that we can't be a little bit more sophisticated and somebody got to pay for it. Even if we have a war in Iraq, maybe we should have had a budget for that before we entered it. We've got it all reversed, but mark my word, there's a great come-a-getting day coming right around the corner here now. This thing cannot continue, and some tough decisions are going to have to be made.
What do you think of the No Child Left Behind law?
Well, it was posing for holy pictures. Kennedy got lured into it. I do agree with some of the testing stuff. You can't test kids and then 2 years later share the results with teachers. Kids moved on. You have an assessment program, that baby ought to be back in the hands of teachers within 6 to 8 weeks, so you can see the deficiencies and see the needs. But the one thing, and I give Tony Earl credit for that, boy, he put that 3rd grade reading test in Wisconsin, and I can remember, and I love Tony. It was a tragedy that he didn't get a second term, but he got, I don't know, maybe he was having Yeister. But anyway, I gets around the School Board Association, and I told him just right now, Tony, smile and finesse him. Me telling somebody to smile and finesse him is, So he got up and told those school board members, you don't want 3rd grade reading test, and you don't care, kids know how to read at the 3rd grade. I do, and I'm going to put this where you'll have it. And that's the first time I ever heard the group boo an incumbent governor, but Tony was right, and it was a good test. And we ought to have benchmarks to see how the kids are doing, and that's absolutely important.
Perhaps the lesson politicians learned from Tony Earl is don't try to do too much.
Well, he was a majority floater. I was the assistant majority floater leader, and I campaigned for him many times, and he's just a delightful, good human being. Most of our governors have been. I only have 1 or 2 that I won't mention here today. But the point is, Lee Dreyfus, come on. Warren Knowles, come on. Pat Lucey, he was a quiet guy, almost shy. He didn't make a forceful speech or anything, but he knew what he was talking about, and he decided he was going to merge the University of Wisconsin system. He put her in place. And Warren Knowles decided we ought to have a state system for vocational education. They just had city schools, and he put the whole state in vocational districts. And it was the right idea. There are a couple things I wish we could correct post fact. It's kind of interesting that we didn't have any staff. We had 1 secretary for 7 of us. Then we started, what did they call those? $4 million caucus aides or whatever they were. We didn't have any of that. We did have 1. Ours was Linda Rivets, and I got her hired. Having said that, you hear the modern day legislator, they got to have press secretaries, and they have to have home secretaries and answering service. Do they get paid for traveling around the district? We never did. Government's so much more complicated right now. Well, why don't you try to put together merging a state university system with the University of Wisconsin system and understand that bill? And why don't you try to create a vocational? I haven't seen any kind of major epic institutional change of that dimension coming out of our legislature in recent years. And they've got all that assistance. You'd think they'd just be starlets. We have the 5th most expensive legislature in the nation.
Salaries and support.
If you had all, it costs over half a $1,000,000 a year to keep those people in Madison.
We should go to a part-time legislature?
I think we should go back to a part-time legislature, go unicameral. I mean, they aren't generating anything but $50,000 a year is good health insurance, good retirement. 2 years ago, the assembly met 17 days. A couple speeches, did you know that? The Assembly Republicans under that Hewish over there, they had prayer sessions and only met for 17 days in session. Then a couple committee meetings, march in a couple parades, order your staff to write a couple letters for you. That ain't a bad job. That ain't too much heavy lifting. You know, don't you wish you had one like that?
Is the legislature likely to downsize itself, or?
No, but I'm back to term limits. I'm back to, I don't know, initiative and referendum. California is all bound up in that. That's not good. But 90% of our legislators today, the ones that raise the most money, win.
What was your first campaign like?
My first campaign? Well, in those days they didn't spend much. You know, I borrowed $4,000 from my great aunt Catherine. Uncle Gilbert was the elder partner in Foley and Lardner. Very distinguished lawyer, Supreme Court and all that. And 3% interest. And I bought an old motor vehicle department Nash Rambler, a green one, $600. And I went home, told my folks I was going to run and I was going to live with them. I had no health insurance, no income. And I started campaigning over near Pulaski. And I ended up around Taggart and Anawa and Antigo. And I spent 4 or 5 months of my life with a plat map going door to door in the rural areas. On Saturday, I do Bonnewell and Wittenberg. I could do a village running in the morning. And then at nights, I would walk in Shawano. And I would drive, if there was a factory in Tigerton with 30 employees, I'd be there at 7 in the morning, standing in the rain, shaking their hands. And I gave her the whole 9 yards, and nobody thought I had a chance. I had about 3 people helping me. At my announcement breakfast, I had a big announcement breakfast in my home, and 3 people showed up. Jim Frechette and Ernie Goodwill, 2 Indians, and Melba Bear. But I put out a news release that we had a very successful announcement breakfast. And then I threw a testimonial to myself and had Proxmire come, and he was up for election himself, you know, and he was very serious about that stuff. And he was in Platteville that day, but because I'd worked for him and everything, and he was my friend, he was the best man at our wedding, by the way. But he only stayed for a few minutes and shook everybody's hand, and he said, "Bert, hope you understand, I got a couple more places to go." Anyway, and so nobody gave me a chance. And in the Republican primary, you couldn't split her in a 4-way. Incumbent 1,800, another guy 12, another guy 800, another 450. I had 800. That didn't mean anything because you can't split the vote, and I kept it coming. And by the time they figured I had their candidate in some deep yogurt, well, it was too late. It was the 7th most Republican county in the state, 35% Democratic vote in previous elections. Goldwater versus Johnson. But you know, those wonderful, 70% German. Those guys were pretty well ethnically Republican, but most of all, they'll vote for somebody that's a really hard-working guy. And I was sweating and working hard, and they said, "Well, I don't agree with him, but he works hard. Maybe he'll work hard."
So it's still the personal campaigning, door to door.
Well, they don't do that anymore, do they?
Some of them do.
They proclaim it. They have mailers and flyers, and I never had more signs out than my opponent. What does a sign say? You know, I always like the body bump. I like to touch you. And I'm not a feeling. It isn't sexist. I'm a big guy. I like to give you a hug. And I'll give you one. I'll give her one. It doesn't matter. And that touch them and feel them. And they need some empathy. And they need, most of all today, people need to be listened to. That's what's going on with all those angry people showing up with all those terrible signs. Nobody listens to them. Even the town government, county government, they shut off public presentation. I can remember one time when I was president of the Board of Regents, and the issue was divestiture of investment university investments in corporations doing business in South Africa. And the students were rioting. And old Ben Lawton, from Marshfield Clinic, he always used to say, you know, I'm worried about today's kids. They aren't protesting enough. And I thought about it, and Ben was right. Our young people should protest us. We become older and conservative and less sensitive to the broader community interest and needs, and we're just trying to get through avoiding nursing home care. And by golly, they were protesting then. We couldn't even get up to Regents meetings on the 19th floor. We had to walk up the stairwells, and Hanson or whoever, the police chief, and everything. So we had a great big meeting in the student auditorium, the student, whatever, pavilion or whatever we call it. And that baby was filled. There must have been 400 or 500, 600 students there, and I'm chairing a meeting. Old Ed Hales from Racine, fellow regent, and we're sitting there. And okay, you each get 5 minutes. Tell us what you think. Well, those kids were getting up, and they were throwing everything at us except rotten tomatoes and one of the chairs. And in 5 minutes, I'd gavel them. Okay, next speaker. And they were shouting, and Ed Hills kept saying to me, "Shut them up! Shut them up!" I said, "Ed, let them speak. They'll feel good if they speak. They'll feel that somebody listened to them. They'll gotten some of the vitriol out of them. They will feel that democracy works a little bit." Bang! Let them! Shut them up! Shut them up! And then he finally said, "Are you afraid of them?" I said, "Ed, you think I'm afraid of them? See that curtain back there? Let's go back there and I'll show you how afraid I am of people." And but my point is that if our democracy is going to work, we must expand it to preserve it. We must tax wealth to preserve our democracy. And the only way you can is have, as bad as Madison is and all the hits they take, you can't do anything, Madison, except run something through 15 committees. They actually think democracy works. They actually vote, 70–80% of them. What do you want? So I say, library boards, city councils, and everything, we open it up, transparency, let the people speak, sometimes just to be heard. You might even know you're not right, but you want your views to be heard. That's a critical question in our democracy right now.
Does the internet gives everybody a voice, I suppose, but there's such a cacophony. Too much information is as bad as too little. What do you think of the electronic, either as a communications or information or educational medium?
I'm a cultural eunuch. I just loved my newspaper, though. I mean, you can't wrap fish in an internet, and you can't take it and sit on the stool in the bathroom and read it. You can't take it to bed with you and turn the light on and then turn it off and then read some more, and you can't clip it out, and you can't embrace it. It's like a book. It talks to you when you want it to talk to you. It doesn't talk to you when you don't want it to talk to you. It's a constant companion. You can read it in the car. You can. The loss of that, and it might be a generational thing. I don't know how we replace. You know, when I got to the legislature in '65, the media was so important. Because you had those pews there up in the front, and John Wingard would be there, and Gene Harrington, and Neil Shively, and Matt Palmer, and all the press, AP, and the other one, and they'd all be there, and the budget would come up. And the Republicans, majority floor leader would come up, and this is why it's good for the state of Wisconsin. We'd all be watching to see if the press was writing that down. And then our person, Frank Nicolay or whoever, Obey, whatever, they get up, or Huber would come down with his cut off finger, and this is why it's good for this state. And we'd be watching to see if the press would come. And the next thing we'd do would go out, and the Sentinel was Republican, and the Journal was a little Democrat, and to see how our story was covered and what the people thought. And the press were really an important instrument. So same thing at the regent meetings. When I originally got on the board of regents, TV cameras would be there. All of the major news media would be there, waiting to see what the regents did from their committee meetings on Thursday to their board agenda on Friday. All of that has been lost because all the decisions are made ahead of time and phone calls. And Tommy Thompson started having the president of the board come over and meet with Clauser before the regent meeting and decide how the issues would be resolved, when historically governors appointed their friends to the Board of Regents and the friends turned around and argued with the governor on behalf of the institution. So it doesn't even pay to go to a regent meeting now. The press might cover it. It's a cooked deal. And we've fractured our democracy, and we've not allowed wholesome, thoughtful debate around the issues so that people can be sensitized to it. So everybody is kind of reverting to their mess of crooks and bums, and it don't make any, and to some degree they are. Jim Doyle has been a disappointment to me. I told the legislator the other day, the only difference between Wisconsin and Illinois is Milosevic has a better hairdo. And I said, maybe what we could do in Illinois and Wisconsin, maybe you could have a spring baseball game, see who steals the most bases. Because if you look at the fundraising going on here and there, what's the difference? Oh, when I take money from somebody, it's pure and untainted. Look at how the Supreme Court voted. Look at how the Supreme Court voted recently. My goodness, 4 of them said you take $1,000 from somebody and not have to recluse yourself. I don't know if you give me
take any amount, didn't they say?
Yeah. Well, I don't know about you, but somebody helped me out. I've always been grateful. I mean, right now, Ron Domine from AFSCME's passed away, and he's going to have some of his ashes spread on my campsite at home, as kids called. I'll never forget him for what he did to help me get there. Why? Well, somebody give you $20,000 and you wouldn't be grateful?
Well, apparently the state Supreme Court majority, 4 of them, said we're not like ordinary people. We're not influenced by stuff like that.
You're right. This court, in terms of legal acumen, I mean, when my uncle Gilbert Hardgrove was asked to serve on the Supreme Court, they were the most distinguished legal minds in the state. You look, go back to Curry and all of these people, they're very, well, Shirley Abramson has some of the modality, but she takes $1.4 million and says, well, she took so much money, she's beyond reproach. Nobody's beyond reproach. So this is a weak court. There are at least a couple of them that probably couldn't make justice of peace in Channel County. And how would you at least think that posit would be so objective and so sensate that no matter how small you were, up against whomever, you'd have one good day where efficacy and truth and impartiality ruled, wouldn't you? That's what I thought. Well, we don't have it. So it's a serious moment. I wish I got a bad knee and I'm trying to get it fixed so I can live 10 more years to see how this thing turns out. But there's coming to get a day we can't. There's a great day of reconciliation coming to the American people. And it isn't all in Washington. And it isn't all in Madison. It's right through our government where the singular interest outweighs the common interest, where the lack of, the hedonistic, capitalistic, entrepreneuring ethic is so pervasive that you forget about the next guy. My mother, good Irish Catholic lady, told me, Bert, live conservative and take care of your own family, and then vote liberal to help the next guy, because he might not or she might not be as lucky as you were. And I tried to instill that in my kids. I think that's the strength of our democracy. If not, why do I care if I should pay taxes anymore? I got my 8 kids through school. Why do I care whether people got health care? I got Medicare, socialist, and I got government paid for health insurance. Cost me $7,000 a year. Supplement. Hell with the next guy. This thing is eaten at the core of our democracy. And it is causing the demise of America. And it's so fractionated us that rational people are not able to prevail outside of Dane County. And it seriously concerns me. I wish I was younger. I wish I was 40 now. I'd get up on a horse. I'd ride across this state with a mighty... And people would believe me, and they would be with me. You're with me right now. I can see it in your pupils. You know I'm right.
Well, I've been in Madison all my life. I may be a tainted liberal to start with. You see.
No, but you know what I'm saying. I mean, it wasn't... I think we have the political persona today that you got to tell people what they want to hear.
Well, once again, the politicians have apparently learned the lesson. You tell people the truth and you'll lose. Huh? That's the lesson they seem to
have learned. But it's a question of how you say it and where you say it, and if you're doing it through the media, that's one thing. But I always felt that if you thought I was intelligent, and if you thought I was reasonably sincere and well-motivated, that if you only agreed with me 75% of the time, you'd say, well, I'd rather have him there than somebody going like this. I mean, I never made a speech to the Wisconsin School Board Association and said something different than when I talked to 10,000 teachers at the WA convention. Now, I might have used a different adjective here or there, and I might have stressed something versus something not, but no duplicitous message. And I'm watching this healthcare thing. My goodness, the message coming out of that thing is so convoluted. I can't keep up with it, and so the people are discouraged and they're hurt and they're afraid. Healthcare is so bad in Shawano County. I can't begin to tell you. People can't wait till their wife is 65 so she can get her hip replaced. A friend of ours, they were too poor and she wasn't getting normal mammogram. She hit 65, bango, she's got one. How long has that been there? Got her removed this last week. So we have 3 fundraisers going on in Shawano County now. Young couple, he's got an 80-acre farm. I think he can't make a living on that, milking 50 cows, driving a truck. She works at Quick Trip, no insurance. They had 2 premature babies, 2-pounders, and it's costing thousands and thousands of dollars to take care of those babies, and we're holding a dance and a card party and a bake sale. 3 of those going on now. A little Indian kid had, and they've got Indian socialized medicine. The people up in Shawano County line up to get employed by the Indians at the Menominee Casino and the North Star Casino so they can get Indian health care. Socialist health care.
From the tribes.
Yeah, and their health care program is really good. So 3 of them right now in the paper where, maybe $2,000 they raise, and those bills will be way over $100,000. They will be broke and in a deep, dark hole the rest of their life.
And yet at the same time, just a couple of years ago, Congress tightened the bankruptcy laws, so you
right.
can't declare bankruptcy for medical
It costs
reasons.
$1,500 more to declare bankruptcy, so you had to borrow money to declare bankruptcy. And I took on Herb Cold, Herb and I have been friends. He sends me a box of goodies at Christmas. I probably won't get one this year. He voted for that. And now half of the bankruptcies in America are due to health care, and these people are suffering. I had a guy come around and spray my windows for bugs the other day. $100 a house. We've got a farm over there in Underhill. And I asked him about his health insurance. It's $1,600 a year. Oh, boy. Well, I got a $7,000 deduct, so that's $7,600. Well, yeah, he fell out of a ladder the other day. My leg was black and blue. I thought I broke it. Couldn't afford to go to the doctor. So he just walked around on it.
So President Obama apparently has, right from the start, had the method of trying to deal by consensus and compromise and get people on board. Has that been the wrong approach?
Yes. Yes. Leadership. Sometimes you just got to get out in front of the parade. Sometimes, I met LBJ many times. I had a chance to take out Linda Bird one time. I was working for Prox, and my friend had the date, but it was he couldn't do it. She was too tall for him, and he said, "You want that date?" And I said, well, "What I got to do?" I had a tux and something was going to cost me $100, and I took a look at her. She looked too much like LBJ, so I said, "The hell with it." So she married that Charles Robb. But I'll tell you what, when you met LBJ, I'm going to tell you what, he should tell that Nelson. There won't be any farm subsidies in Nebraska for 20 years. There should be no new post offices. I'd call him in and offer him the ambassador to Liechtenstein. I mean, there's time where you can't be a mugwump. You can't be, you know, and LBJ would have done that in the civil rights. So, I mean, you know, the Southern Democrats weren't voting for the Voting 65 and 66 Act, or whatever, the Voting Rights Act, Civil Rights Act. LBJ called in old Dirksen, who was a good boy. In those days, I used to be able to go sit in the Senate gallery and listen to Humphrey and Dirksen and all those people debate. It was really wonderful. He called me, you know, he said, if you delivered the Republican votes on this thing, we ain't going to get all them Southern Democrats. He said, you'll be as well known as Abraham Lincoln. And Dirksen delivered the Republican votes. And LBJ said, those two votes will change the party affiliation in the South, and they did. And the greatest political speech I've ever heard is the one he gave to Congress on the Civil Rights Act.
Well, he knew that he said right out that that the Civil Rights Act is going to lose the South for the Democrats for at least a generation.
Well, it's more than that.
And it's more than that now. So, but he was willing to do that, apparently. That's
well, LBJ, if he hadn't had Vietnam, would have gone down as premier. And LBJ, it was kind of a tragedy, but I got to meet him. Did you ever shake his hand?
No.
He grab your hand, grab your elbow, and he gets right up there close. And he's a little taller than I am, and he breathes on you a little bit. How are you doing? And yeah, what do you want me to do? You know, I mean, a guy, you know.
The LBJ treatment, I've heard about
he'd
that.
get guys and often get on them like this, you know. And some said that I had a few of his characteristics. But anyway, but the point is, I have had such bad thoughts, you know, in your sedentary and geriatric years. I sometimes wish the South had won the Civil War. So we could have got rid of those people. They could have Jesus land, and we could annex to Canada. Because our ethic is so different. Our morality is so different. They have a plantation mentality, and the things they say and do, and, you know, they're different. And I thought with all the Northerners moving south for sun and recreation that some of that would dissipate. It seems not to have. I mean, I'm used to Yarborough's. Ralph Yarborough, a senator from Texas. He was the last liberal, and of course the female governor, she was so good.
Ann Richards.
Yeah, but the point is, we're splitting up. I mean, the ethic in Canada is an ethic, the social contract I can live with. And the northern ethic, okay, look at Vermont's got the best health care system, and old Bernie Sanders is right out there fighting for everybody.
Yeah, socialist from Vermont. That's,
yeah, I'm
sounds like an oxymoron. But
no, I'm left of socialist right now in my thinking, and maybe it's because somebody's got to tilt that meter into the middle. So I don't know if any of these people here have children. I love those children. I want those children to succeed. Somebody paid for our 8 children to go through public schools, let's say an average of $6,000 a year times 12. And I'm going to object to property taxes? And my kids all graduated from college. And college tuition isn't 25% of the cost of instruction. We used to try to hold it at 33%. And I want kids to go to college and to the vocational schools. And this intergenerational disconnect with my Medicare and their nothing just is horrifically bothersome.
Well, let's go back a little bit in chronology here. You worked for Senator Bill Proxmire. What did you do? And tell us about Proxmire.
Well, I was out there. I didn't have a significant job. Actually started on his patronage, and then
This was in Washington.
right, and he expected us also to come up work in the office. At that time, the whiz kid in his office was Les Aspin, who was he had the bright and shining star, and so that I did go for tasks in his office, but I also had a job where I could go to school with law students and medical students, and me, the School of Foreign Service, because I only had to work 4 or 5 hours a day. I started very early, and so that gave me an opportunity to see the inside of the Capitol and to watch how Bill Proxmire operated. Of course, you won't find that anymore when you run for United States Senate and spend in your last campaign $175, and that money was used mostly to send for postage, send checks back. The man was different. He was a eunuch. He was singular in purpose. He was intelligent, but he didn't have a lot of friends. Maybe Paul Douglas, and I know the senator in Maryland and a few others. And it was really a shame. He kept himself in such good shape. He had his weight within a pound or two all the time, jogging and stuff, and how he ate. And he got Alzheimer's. And at the end, he didn't know what was going on. I sent him he was best man at our wedding, and I sent a picture out to Alan and stuff, maybe to show it to Prox and stuff. And so, you know, the cruel twist and turn of life. A person can take care of their physical well-being until the cows come home, and you get that thing. So I'm a superintendent up in Niagara, and Niagara is next to Iron Mountain, Michigan, right on the border. We shopped in Michigan River there. All of a sudden, he'd won an election, and it was about 6 months out into his term. And somebody said, "Hey, Proxmire's in town." "What the heck's Proxmire up in Niagara? He just won an election." There old Prox was walking the streets in Niagara. Well, I ran out, met him, and I was just like a puppy, you know, good to see him, and got him come into school, introduced him around, and we sat in the office, and we talked for 5 or 10 minutes, and all of a sudden I could see him getting nervous. And well, Bert, I better keep going here. And he gets out on the street, and I start following him down the street, you know, just trying to get some conversation and a little fun to see him. And all of a sudden I realized he was saying to me, "Bert, I'm your friend, but this is between me and the people. And candidly, I don't want your friends and I don't want your enemies. I want this is my relationship. And so thanks for being so kind, and I'll always be there for you." And one of the things that amazed me about Proxmire was that every Tom, Dick, and Harry that ever ran for public office would always seek his endorsement on the Democratic ticket. And he'd give it. But he never asked for your endorsement. He ran on his own with the people. And but he paid a terrible price. Friday night at 4 o'clock, he was out to National Airport and on his way back to Wisconsin. And goodness knows, he had no family life. He lost his first wife to Miles McMillan, and it was tough. You wouldn't want to have been married to him. He was married to his job and to the people of Wisconsin. He'd get on that plane. So before I went up to campaign in Shawano, I asked him if I could just drive him around for a weekend to see, you know, how he did it. Man, we went for blocks in Milwaukee. I stayed in that house in Knockmall. So it's 9 o'clock at night. I'm getting kind of tired. And I say, you know, Prox, maybe, are you about ready to hang her up? Well, no, there's one more bowling alley. I know there's going to be a good crowd. And we had to go over to that bowling alley and shake everybody's hands. Now, that man was devoted. He was very independent in Washington. He couldn't deliver much pork to Wisconsin because he had the Golden Fleece Award. One time he gave the Golden Fleece Award to the Department of Public Instruction in reverse, that we had done so much good.
Oh.
And nobody ever told me about it. All of a sudden, there it was, and he gave it to us maybe out of friendship or something. And so, you know, and I thought, because they had a little ceremony for him in the Capitol when he passed away and stuff, and I'd heard that maybe Ellen was trying to, raise some funds for some sort of memorial. It's hard to raise funds when you ain't carried the water for anybody. Almost impossible. At least if you're carried the water for drug companies, they might throw. Look at Bush raising all this money for that thing down there in Southern Methodist University. Who would give him any money? Oh, but Prox, because he was so independent and he attacked the abuses of government.
Now there was apparently a driven man. I mean, as you say, he was legend. He must have shaken every hand in the state 10 times. My own story, one night in the 60s, I was living in the Milwaukee area and went to the Hales Corners Speedway on a Saturday night in the middle of summer. Quarter-mile dirt track, race track. And there he was at the ticket booth. Hi, I'm your Senator, Bill Proxmire. Apparently it was the biggest crowd.
Yeah.
At 8 p.m. on Saturday night or something.
He knew them all.
And there he's out there at Camp Randall, Packers Stadium.
But at the flower show and stuff, he had Band-Aids on his hand from shaking hands so much and so hard. And he taught me a few things. Number one, you can't, when you're trying to touch people, that's what you're doing, you can't talk with them too long. I mean, if some guy ties you up. And so he has somebody moving him along. And I found that out in my own campaign, knocking on doors. Most of the time I'd ask them, well, do you have any questions you'd like to ask me about how I would vote in Madison? And most people don't. Most people don't have I wouldn't know an issue in Madison. And they stutter around. Well, I don't want to inconvenience you, but if you ever do, just you call me. And I sure wanted to present myself so that you could, if you had any questions, and then move on as fast as you can. And once in a while, you'd run into somebody that, well, the moon is blue and it's made of Limburger cheese and it has Martians on it, and it does have a blue tint. I come to think about it. Well, good to see you, but you got to keep moving. You can't. Now, if somebody really got a really serious question, you take their name and their number, you write it right down, and then you get the answer, and you call them right up and get it to them. They'll never forget that.
No.
Because they don't think you're sincere enough. See?
So Proxmire was driven. You talked about your early campaigning. Would you describe yourself as somehow driven?
Yes, I think about it. I had a bachelor's degree in history and a master's degree. I did my thesis at the United Nations Library and decided, I'd end up the third vice consul in Baghdad, so writing papers in a little cubicle. That ain't Grover with his narcolepsy. So I came back here, and I always wanted to run for public office. I decided there was time to pull the trigger. And I'd pretty well made out my decision to be a Democrat when I was out there. I was at Kennedy's inauguration. I was standing out in that snowstorm, and when Martin Luther King marched, and my graduation ceremony at American University, I said, just send a diploma. I was back in Madison. That was when Kennedy made his great foreign policy speech. I wished I'd have stayed for that. And I decided all of my life I've been for the little guy. On the playground at school, in grade school, I was generally the biggest guy on the playground. And I always got on the side of the little guy. And if Earl Carpenter was having a gang coming home after him after school, I went home with a girl and we took him on. And all my life I've been for the little guy. And I saw that out in Washington, D.C. It's not perfect. It's a split nickel in many instances today. Joe Lieberman comes to mind. Having said that, who fights for the little guy? And I was always for the underdog, and I just decided when I was out there I'd rather go to the Fighting Bob Fest with all the nuts and kooks and environmentalists and feminists and gay and lesbian and all those people and get loved to death than go to some of those Rush Limbaugh gatherings and Newt Gingrich gatherings and get hated to death. Now that's very oversimplification, so I decided I'll come back and run as a Democrat in the 7th most Republican county in the state. Well, I just started figuring it out day by day. You know, well, I drew up all my own ads, and once or twice I was going to hit my opponent. And my mother was all over me, don't you say anything bad about him. And I had challenged him to debate. Now, he was not a poor man. He came over from Norway, had a couple feed mills. He was on the bank board of directors in Tigerton. Schwanke boy was on the county board, and he was also in the legislature. But this is a terrible thing to do. He had a Norwegian accent. And so I challenged him to debate on some stupid issue that I hardly knew myself. And the Republicans panicked a little bit and thought he ought to get out and speak more. So he went into the Rotary Club in Shawano and talked about vetoing this bill and vetoing that bill, and he comes from the village of Tigerton. And some people didn't think he was very intelligent. Hell, he could buy me out several times. His net worth. He was an intelligent man. It worked. It backfired on him. So I guess my point is that everyone has strengths and weaknesses as a political candidate, and you need to assess your own. I mean, what would you be like as a candidate? What would you accentuate in your own persona to get people to feel comfortable with you, to be willing to share with you? I never asked anyone ever for a vote. When you get up to a door and say, gee, I'd appreciate it if you'd vote for me, the person's got to think, well, I'd like a little time to think about this. So he wants me to give him something, and I don't know if I want to give it to him something. So I give him my piece of literature, and I say, gee, thanks for talking to me. I'd appreciate it if you'd look over my literature. Same question, no uncomfortableness, and you leave the person you're talking to comfortable. So, I mean, there are modalities, and you got to be careful. Being a hugger and a shaker, I like to touch people. I wasn't a signed candidate, but if the old lady's got arthritis, you better not squeeze too hard. And I always remembered old Lee Dreyfus. I loved him. He's a great guy, but he had a terrible handshake.
Oh, he did that?
He did the patty cake. And his hands were really soft. He never worked very physically very hard. And so everyone's got a different way of approaching people, and I think if you got a strong radio voice, use radio. If you're a good speaker, do the speaking. So to some degree it's a presentation, but you have to know yourself. You know, it's a little difficult to look in the mirror sometime and decide that you ain't all that good looking, and that you might have to. So it's a little different today. I never rode in a car in a parade. I'll be darned if people, you know, riding in a car, waving at them. Look how important I am. You got to be kidding! I put my wife, my kids, and I put some Grover girls in the front of the car in the back with banners and thing, and I walked the route. They like to see you sweat.
Didn't Proxmire do that? And
yes.
And I think our current senator, not Cole.
Feingold?
Feingold. Doesn't Feingold do that?
I don't know.
Walk the route instead of riding
He
it?
always walked the route. Man, and I'd set my, and in those days we used to have highway maps, and I'd stamp my name on them. I don't know if I violated too many laws, but then I'd set a box here and strategic along the route, so I'd just be running out and I'd have another box. And in the election year, I'd just use my brochures and set them out strategically, so I never ran out. But I can't tell you how those Bondwell German farmers like to see me sweat. And they say, working. And they came over, and when they get over with you, they don't switch. You can count on them quite a bit. You got to be a real fall ball to lose them. So I mean, there are methods of. You can't knock on doors beyond 7 or 8 o'clock in the city.
No, not anymore.
People are, and in those days, during the daytime, the farmers were home. On Saturdays, I could catch most of the people in the village. And I'd park my car and I'd run those villages. It'd take me a whole day for Bondwell or Wittenberg. That's how I met my wife, knocking the doors in Gresham. One night, and she was in that little house, and I'd seen her at the Catholic church dinner and the Lutheran church dinner and the village homecoming parade, and I thought, and I'm 27 and I'm pretty I'm thinking, oh man, I wouldn't mind knowing her, but I concentrate. You got to focus like Proxmire. So I did. And after I won, I called up a lady in Gresham, Mike Farrell's mother. He was a legislator from Racine. And she said, yeah, she knew the name of the girl there, and that, she thought she was available, so I called her up. And I asked her to go to some J-set thing. I had a chair or something. And by golly, took her out about 3 times and fell madly in love. And I'm in the legislature. And they almost had a closed session, and I couldn't get home for my wedding. Wedding was on Saturday, and it was touch and go whether we were locked in. You know, what's the motion? I forget.
Oh, there was a call of the House.
A call of the House, yeah. I couldn't legally leave, and so I made it home. So I asked her later on. And by the way, it's the best thing that happened to me. If I lost that election and won her, it'd been a good election. So anyway, I asked her if she voted for me, and she said she had. And I said, well, I only carried Gresham by 10 votes. Old Charlie Ebert was in the legislature a few years before me, and then Bob Maratz, who was former speaker and beer lobbyist. And she said, well, you had in that brochure that you were an Eagle Scout, and I figured if you were an Eagle Scout, you couldn't be all bad. So that's, how do you know how many people vote for you?
Now, you'd seen her at dinners at both the Catholic and the Lutheran Church.
Yes.
Now, you were campaigning, but why was she at both?
Because that's how they do it in small towns.
Yeah,
the Lutherans come to the Catholic dinner, and the Catholics go to Lutheran dinner.
It's a social circuit. Huh?
Yeah, everybody supports everybody on their little. It isn't uniform and whole, but it's pervasive. And I saw her at the Lutheran dinner, and she had a guy with her. And shucks, it looks like she's taken. But that I found out later was her brother, who was going to UW Stevens Point, and she was. But so so politics has its benefits.
So. Why did you turn out to be driven? Any idea?
Well, I think that I have partly because I'm a narcoleptic, which I got at the age of 14. And you know, it's not sleep apnea. And when I got it, when I was in high school, at the age of 14, I was lifeguard up at Gardner Dam Boy Scout camp on the other. And you have instant, brief, deep sleeps every 3-4 hours. This terrible, overwhelming sense of wanting to sleep, and you're trying to keep awake. And then in moments of humor or excitement, you get what is called as a catalepsy, and you collapse, and as soon as the moment's over, you're rigid. And then there's one other condition where you can be asleep in a room with other people in there, and you can hear everything they're saying, but you can't move out of the sleep mode. And then later you'll wake up and you can remember everything John said about you.
But you weren't really asleep.
I don't know what I was.
But in
those days they thought it was a psychosomatic attempt to avoid reality. But some doctor from Neenah came up, and the camp director had him look at me and he said, I think you got narcolepsy. He sent me out to Mayo's. And the Japanese had done some research, and it has to do with the RVMs in the eye and some virus in the sleep mechanism in the brain. So they put me on 15 milligrams of dexedrine a day. If you'd have taken it, your heart would be right out of your chest. And that would keep me pumped up, but I was all sweating, and then I'd drink coffee and chew on tea bags and pull the hair out of my chest and tickle my nose. And I was deadly afraid of being caught with a picture in the legislature asleep. And those regent meetings were just painful. I'd chew on plastic cups, and I'd get jumping around. And so I generally had 2 speeds. Number one, I would overwhelm you. I'd be so aggressive that some people say I get in your face too much, you see. And the other is, I had to have a driver when I was state superintendent, and my secretary, I had to speak out at the Bishop's Place or whatever where the football team goes or whatever, west side of Madison for practice. Anyway, and I had a secretary, asked her if she could drive me. I got down in the State Department garage, got in the car and fell asleep, and she drove me out to the Bishop's, whatever that place is, on the west side of Madison, and then...
Yeah, the former seminary.
Right, and woke me up. And one of the conditions, narcolepsy, you fall asleep and wake up real fast. I don't have any wake-up drowsiness. And I got up and gave a speech, got back in the car. So a lot of times we'd be driving around the state, and I'd have 3 or 4 speeches going, you know, Boy Scouts here, the speech and language people there, the Library Association there, and Rotary Club there. And I didn't repeat myself too much. And I fall asleep, wake up, give a speech, fall asleep, wake up, give a speech. But it ruined my neck, and so that I always was playing with a bad neck, and I've had neck surgery on my spine, and I have a cadaver bone in 4 and 5 and titanium clip, and I think I got that out of it.
So that was from you'd fall asleep?
Yeah, my neck was, and you know, fall asleep in the car, and so that was my little cross. I would tell you that they have a miracle drug now called Provigil. It's Provigil, and they give it to airline pilots that fly these bombers for 28 hours. I take that thing and I'm awake right now. I do not feel like I have to sleep, and I'm talking to you. And I feel awake. And much of the time, I used to have to get to the job at 7 in the morning, do all my writing and organizing, because by 10, 11 o'clock, I was sucking coffee and sleeping on Barbara's old couch and up and down and jumping around and hollering and trying to keep awake. And so that was a little cross. On the other hand, my falling asleep and waking up, at night I always had books at my bedstand. And when I wake up, then I'd read for 30 minutes. And if I found a good quote, I'd bend the page and everything, bring it into my secretary, have her type it out. And I kept loading my canon for my speeches. So, you know, you work around it.
That, having accomplished what you did, though, with such a handicap, that's pretty amazing.
Well, I always wondered what I could have been if I hadn't had that.
Because prior to being the state superintendent, you had to drive yourself.
Yeah, I had a few accidents.
Nothing serious, I hope.
I can't remember. I didn't kill anybody.
But
and I never got a ticket. But a couple times I could have been more alert.
Yeah, so just having to adjust to that for your entire life, it just seemed mind-boggling to me.
Well, there are a lot of people, in fact, the National Association called me up and wanted me to address them in Milwaukee this last summer, but I thought, oh, what the hell, I get up and tell them a mess of war stories, and they've all got the same problem. You know, there's science behind it, maybe they need to understand that more, other than this Provigil, but and Marshfield Clinic featured me too, and Mayo Clinic featured me, because there was, I mean, I can't tell you how my teacher shouted at me on Monday morning when I fell asleep at 8 o'clock in their class. I can't tell you what the coaches did to me when I fell asleep on the school bus riding to a football game I was playing in. I used to fall asleep walking my girlfriend home and fall to the sidewalk. And they all thought, the coaches, my Latin teacher called me out, he was sure I was staying out all night with my girlfriend. No, I slept the whole weekend away. And I didn't know what was wrong with me, and my mother didn't give me too much sympathy. You know how those Irish Catholic mothers are, get your rear end there. And so I think people need to be, you know, it's different than sleep apnea. Sleep apnea often has to do with weight and stuff. And it was tough. I mean, one time 4 of us went down to the state basketball tournament. My dad let me use the car. We got up down the old field house way up by the horns. The other 3 were cheering in the game, and I was sleeping. And I had problems, you know, go visit somebody and everybody's talking around. I have to lay in the corner and sleep. And you can't explain it. And so it's this and that. But, you know, we made it. And I just urge everybody to be empathetic if someone has that real condition, because you couldn't be an accountant. You couldn't be a lawyer. You couldn't be somebody that has to be at the desk for long periods of time. I had 2 or 3 hours, and boy, I had to jump up and do cartwheels and whistle Dixie. And I spoke to the DNR leadership thing here a while ago, and a guy that was working over there remembered me. It was at DPI just before I had left, and there was a gal there that worked at DPI. She was so competent in the budget job, and I think Faye Stark was her name. And we had an administrative council meeting at 8 o'clock in the morning. Now, sometimes driving in from Cottage Grove at 8 in the morning, I couldn't keep awake. Pumping coffee, driving down East Washington, hope I didn't hit a stoplight. And I got to that meeting, and I had that overwhelming problem. And this guy from DNR introduced me. He said that there he was at a budget staff meeting, 15, 20 of us, and he was walking around the room singing a song. And Faye told him, because he was new after the meeting was over, don't underestimate. He heard everything that was said. I was just trying to keep awake, but I did hear everything that was said. The other thing that you get out of it, I'm a quick study. If I don't get her quick, I don't get her. And, and so that comprehension and retention, I have really pretty good retention. But
now, I was going to ask you, you can't do a desk job, yet you managed to do a doctoral dissertation.
Well, yeah, boy, was that something. Well, every time I came home, my wife got pregnant, and I thought, boy, this legislature, old Kurt McKay said there are 2 sensations, and Mary Panzer should have listened to that a little bit. The one is the thrill of victory, and the next sensation is agony of defeat. And so that from the moment I got to the legislature, I was trying to prepare to exit. I don't think those are lifetime jobs. I don't admire people who stay 30, 40 years. I think you ought to hold that for 10, 12 years, kick it as hard as you can, make your statement, and then let somebody else have a chance to govern our democracy. And that it shouldn't be a full-time employment job. I mean, what are we talking about here? And so, I don't know. How did I get on that? Yeah, so I drove over to Stevens Point and picked up a teaching certificate postmasters because I got interested in education. Did my practice teaching in Clintonville, but I couldn't get, and it was part-time legislature in those days, and Shawano was so Republican that the school board didn't think it would be appropriate for a Democrat to have long-term social studies teaching contract at the Shawano High. And so I couldn't get a job there. I did a little at Bowler, a little at Gresham. So I had to keep going because, I mean, man, we got kids coming like mad and intentionally. And so then I thought, well, what do I do at night in the legislature? A lot of them play cards. Some sit in front, park motor in and drink coffee. Some would sit in their offices and rehash old sores. Some of them do nefarious and other things. And I thought, well, I better go get myself a doctorate in educational administration. So I went out there and I met with the university, and they let me enroll, and it took me several years. I was in college for 20 years minus 3 semesters, four straight at St. Augustine, the rest every semester taking courses. And I come back to the apartment. We lived in an apartment with Bruce Pelgrin, Cleet Vanderpeeren, Bill Rogers, a real exotic group. And we did that to save money. I used to be able to save $100 a month on $15 a day per diem. One session I slept on a mattress on the floor, and if you're willing to...
At your office?
No, in the apartment, but then you could, and if you're willing to go to all those eateries at the Park Motor Inn, but boy, I can't eat meatballs and chicken wings anymore. And so I was doing that, and I liked the coursework, but after a day in the legislature, you're a little tired, And I couldn't study at home because I had to run and keep those Republicans happy, and that was a parade every weekend. And you go to 4 potato pancake dinners in a row on the same day and tell each group it was the best you ever tasted. Now that's arduous.
Dedication.
And so I did my work down here in that apartment, and one time it was getting tight, and my major professor gave me no breaks. He'd let me have an incomplete I didn't get there. And I moved into a little rooming house right down there near the Student Union, common community bath, and the business manager from the Appleton School District was there, shared a little iron bed here, and he was in the next room, and so that I had no disturbances because the apartment was a little noisy sometimes, and so that's what I did. And I paid for every nickel myself. No grants, no loans, no government bequests.
Yeah, well, let's talk about higher education. Since we think, you think, you served 17 years on the Board of Regents.
Right.
That may be the all-time record. Part of
It is the all-time record for the modern merged board.
So you were appointed by Pat Lucy in 1977, and that's when you were still superintendent at Niagara.
Mm-hmm.
Why did Lucy appoint you?
I think Pat Lucy, first of all, he was tough and he was smart. He wasn't a flamboyant, black-slapping politician like I probably could be perceived. But he was dedicated and he knew government, and he brought real acumen in terms of business and that, and he had his goals and objectives. And Pat thought it was a miracle that I got elected in Shawano County. I can remember after I got elected, Warren Knowles said in the Republican caucus, we got to get some young, energetic guys like Grover, and Pat Lucy told me, Bert, you vote whatever way you have to there, because we'll never get a Democrat again if you lose. And Pat had Dick Weening and Tony Earl and Dennis Conta and myself and a group of younger people that were energetic and supportive of him. And I mean, I managed the merger of the University System Board of Regents merger thing. It was a Senate bill, but I had to get through the Assembly. Steve Holgram was his lobbyist, and I don't know, he just was nice to me. Actually, Gene, I think, liked me. I think I got on the Board of Regents. Tony Earl said that they were having a little dinner, and Gene didn't like them damn legislators out in the mansion too much, you know. And they weren't sober enough. And they're having a discussion, and Pat said, I got a regent appointment. Who do you think I should appoint? And Gene said, why don't you appoint that Grover? He'll raise a lot of hell. So 20 year old claims that's how I got on. But anyway, he also appointed my brother to the county judgeship in Shawano County. And he has now set the tenure record of a judge in Shawano County, 30-some years. And he, in his courtroom, hangs Joe McCarthy's picture, because Joe McCarthy won his first election as the Shawano-Outagamie County Circuit Judge, coming from Shawano, see. So, Pat, I think, understood, he understood, I don't know, I think he understood me. It doesn't mean that he didn't. I didn't mean that he didn't every once in a while tell me this or that. And he forgave me for my inconsistencies, but most of all, I think, see, he'd been around for a long time. He'd been in the legislature. He'd been the state chair. He'd run the state pretty much. And he knew the difficult circumstance I was in. I mean, in the second election, the issue of the Dirksen Amendment, namely 34 states already endorsed it, that if it passed in Wisconsin, we could have changed the Constitution and allow state legislatures one house to be apportioned other than on population. And the Farm Bureau was all over it with Casicaitis, and they pressured Mickey McDougall from Langley and Oconto County so much he switched parties. And they were all over me.
Now, they wanted one house not to be apportioned by people. Right.
They say, well, you'll have all the senators from Milwaukee, and we'll have Jelk and 2 from up north, you know, and all this territory, and it isn't fair. The Madison, Milwaukee will dictate everything with their population and have more senators. And that the flaw with that is some of those senators aren't worth a damn, and some senators representing a large geographic area might be the most effective. And you can't count stumps and in cows and muskrats and beaver. You got to count people. And I was getting battered, boy. They were after me, and I thought, oh heck, you got to stand for something. I'll show you the scrapbook. I'll send you the articles. Old Grover led the bait to kill that baby, and we killed it. And I led it as a rural guy, and we killed that sucker. And I remember coming out of Warren Knowles' office. He was signing some bill. I think it was if you get so many points, you can go back to school and wipe out some of your driver points, the 12 points. That was my bill. Larry Tyke gave it to me. He was Uncle Larry on the Milwaukee Journal Christmas show. Anyway, I'm coming out, and that old Cascoitus came up to me, and he said, "We're going to get you the next election." Well, he didn't. So, but I think there are times, and I don't mean to say it, some people think maybe I was, I have nicknames of Buffalo and this and that in the legislature. But I was chairman of the Education Committee, and I was on conference committee on the budget, and I was just a majority floor leader. Could have been a majority floor leader, but I couldn't do the doctorate work. And I liked Republicans. You had John Shabazzi and I, boy, we went around. But I liked them. It wasn't personal, and some Republicans you like more than Democrats, and they're all interesting people, and And so I mean, why would you serve if you didn't stand for something? Every once in a while, you got to put her on the line. In my estimation, that health care thing bothers me right now in Washington. I'd put her on the line. I think the arguments are there. I mean, it's not irrational. It's rational. So I don't see a lot of profiles in courage right now.
So did you have a close election each time for
No.
the Assembly?
First time I won by 1,000 votes. 600 in Shawano County, 400 the Indians. God bless my Indians. And
in Menominee County.
Menominee. Yeah, there were 500 votes. I got 400. There's 600 votes. I got 500. There were only 500 up there. They didn't like me. Anyway, and the second time I won by 1850. The third time I won by 3,000. The fourth time I won by 5,000. That was against the biggest name in Shawano, Cantwell. Brothers were doctors, uncles are doctors. One was veterinarian, head of the school board. Bill was a pharmacist, and they thought they had old Grover on the ropes. I licked him in every town, ward, precinct, and voting area in the 2 counties. And then I ended up in the hospital with ulcerative colitis. And then the 5th time, I didn't have a Republican opponent. I just had Albert Ranke Jr., an NFO member, was mad at me because I killed a resolution by Mrs. Mavis, the conservative group, and the Posse Comitatus. I had them in Shawano County. They sued me twice. And McFerrin and Miniszewski had to fight my way out of a meeting hall one time with them. One time they showed up on Saturday morning, walked right in my house and grabbed my head and started praying for me. And the Senate passed it. I don't know. They're going to have 8 Wisconsin legislators go out and investigate the United Nations, see if it was a communist conspiracy. And I'm saying you guys ought to worry about milk prices. They got into NFO. Well, Albert Ranke Jr. was an NFO guy, and he was sure that I might have been. Well, in my first campaign, they said that I was a communist because I worked for Proxmire. So anyway. I had those boys on me. I got sued twice, once with Warren Knowles and Ed Krieger and a mess of people, and then the legislature handled that. And I get up to Niagara, and I'm on a job for about a month, and that Miniszewski sues me again. My board president's a police chief, and he's wondering, well, sheriff's delivering this summons. What did we hire here? Well, it was, and then I don't know who, the Attorney General's office had that dismissed. I said something bad about town government or some darn thing. Well, anyway, my point would be that it was tough sometimes. And I took old Ranke about 12,000 to 2,000.
Now, was that the power of incumbency and the fact that you'd just been campaigning?
No, I'll tell you. If you take my 10 years in the legislature, and I puffed a little bit about this and a little bit about that, I don't think I could name more than 10, certainly not 15 epic moments where I played a significant role in the lives and law of the people of the state. And I wasn't a backbencher. And so where's the reward? Listening to the governor at the state of the state, going to some meeting, get introduced, being on some dais. I had a wonderful reward in helping people. And I had my 50% rule. If old Duck Rye from around over there in the town of Green Valley, and he was a walker and he couldn't get he had to go across a busy highway to get his mail, and he was going to get killed, and I went to work and I got that mailbox moved to this side. It was nice.
That was the kind of thing you can do as a legislator.
I was in the Health and Social Service Department so much in Shawano County they thought I was an employee, and 50% of the time I could help and 50% I couldn't. And I would be arguing substantially available for work and unemployment, and I got in front of the commission out here, and they were bowing and scraping until one day they asked me if I was a lawyer, and I said no. Oh, well. But the point is, you know, I'm in Mrs. Mutter and Mutter's Grocery. She had a tavern Racine. It was called Mutter's Gutter. And her kid had a veterans problem, and I went and straightened that out. Another guy paid $1,000 on a home down Jackson Roth near Wittenberg. Burnham went to somebody in Minneapolis and decided he didn't want the home, and the home thing wouldn't return $1,000. And I went to work on it, and I threatened those guys from 5 ways to Sunday. He got his $1,000 back. Let me give you the epic. And we didn't get any mileage for traveling around the county, not like the modern boys and girls. We only had 2 women in the legislature when I got there. Who were they?
In 63.
65. Carolyn Blanchard and Esty Doder Luckart. No women in the... So here an old farmer in Tigerton, that's 25 miles away from my home. It's the worst snowstorm of the winter. Highway 29, nothing's moving. The snow is knee deep. He calls me up and he says, between Tigerton coming this way about 8 miles, he's got a barn on 29, and he's got calves in it, and he can't get in there to get them water. Wondered if I'd help. Yeah, I'll try. I knew the county highway employee, that John Lawton, those boys kept them friendly to me. Didn't give me any money, but they gave me a nice letter every 2 years, said I was friendly to county municipal employees, and that got circulated to every employee at my expense. And so I got in my car and drove down that highway. There was nothing moving it. The snow was drifted big time. And I went, Ralph Herman was the county highway guy. And I drove all the way out to Tigerton and got that old man out of his apartment, drove him back, and we met Ralph Herman, the county highway guy, and he plowed out the guy's driveway so the guy could get in and feed his calves water, which he did. And then I drove him back to Tigerton, and then I drove all the way home.
That's constituent service.
Well, I'll tell you what happened was the myth started accelerating. Grover can take care of your problem. Well, call Grover. Man, I was getting called for things that, you know, way out of my area of authoritative domain or public responsibility, but I enjoyed that. It was the Boy Scout in me.
In fact, you were an ombudsman.
Well, that's what a good legislator is today. And a good congressman and senator taking care of his constituents' problems with the government is really critical. A good staff can make you. But I just felt good. It was like helping a little old lady across the street, or getting in a Memorial Day parade, or doing a paper drive, and that was very rewarding. Now, in the time I served, you know, hey, the university thing. I was chairman of the education committee when we passed Chapter 115. That's a special ed law before 94-142 passed at the federal level. Again, a Senate bill driven by old Jim Devitt with his blue wig. And He had those special ed mothers. Oh, they were tough. I didn't want to get mugged in the hall by them, but Jim passed that bill over to my committee, and with the help of Gary Johnson and some others, we put that thing through. That's not too bad. But I just really enjoyed, life's complicated. People got problems, and they don't know where to turn, and they don't know who to call for help. And sometimes if you can help them a little bit, or at least direct them, that's very rewarding.
Let's talk about higher education. I'm assuming you think the merger of the two systems was a good idea.
Yes. I don't think Madison suffered, and I don't think the state universities lost prestige or autonomy.
And we were talking about your service on the Regents. Now, you were state superintendent for 3 terms, 12 years altogether, and of course ex officio member of the Board of Regents. So that adds up to 17, which is the all-time record on the Board of Regents. What's your assessment of higher education now, and where should we go from here?
Well, I have some problems. I drove down the Wisconsin Avenue. I saw the great University of Wisconsin Business School, that massive new structure they put there. And I'm thinking the institution does not exist for the business community. And here we are trying to have the 25th, at least the top 25 business schools in America, and I'm thinking, where did Chainsaw Al go to school? What did Arthur Anderson, those guys, and the Exxon people go to school? And I'm not sure that the business school, the people that are donating their money made a lot in the existing system, but I'm not sure that the graduates of the business school, they learn how to shuffle wealth and manipulate wealth, but not create wealth. Gates didn't even graduate from a university, Bill Gates. I think sometimes we better put our money in computer science and engineering and biotech and liberal arts.
This sounds like a criticism of the whole economy. We're no longer making stuff, we're shuffling money.
Well, that was the plan, and we were going to be all lawyers and accountants, and the financial centers would be in Chicago and everything. Now it's in Dubai and Singapore and Hong Kong, and these people blew it. They shuffled wealth, but they didn't create wealth. They gutted the middle class by the international corporate structure, where in fact they weren't creating pools of money to build a factory in Shano. It's in Hong Kong or someplace, Liechtenstein, Eastern Europe. So that these people, I think we should import some of them German managers. Germany is the largest, well, not that, they're the largest exporter of high-tech, high-performance material in the world. We're not.
Second highest importer in the world after China.
Exporter, yeah. And in wind energy, China and Germany and Denmark are way ahead of us. So here we are, hoisted on our own petard. I'm not, and the business community keeps calling on the university to serve it better and graduate more intelligent people. But when you watch the position of WMC around the financing and the support of education, they're missing in action regularly. They are the enemies of education.
Wisconsin Manufacturers and Commerce.
Right.
The leading business.
They
lobby.
are the enemies. They never support our schools, yet they claim that our schools have to generate the intellectual capital, skills, and aptitudes so they can make a fortune. And we don't appreciate them. We don't hug them enough, and we tell them we don't love them enough. I think maybe we should get some of those guys from. We got CEOs that make more in an hour than their employee makes in a year. How do we get so discombobulated? And what's the university teaching? When I don't want to puff too much, but when I was on the Board of Regents, there was this report coming in from the business school, looking at the business, study. Came to the Regents, and it was right during the saving and loan scandal. I'm so mad about it. It's mostly out of Texas, but Neil Bush did a little bit in the Colorado saving. King comes to us, and so I got a couple amendments prepared to this faculty university study at the business school. And thank goodness I talked to enough of my fellow regents, because of course, and I had the two amendments. One is that if you're going to graduate from school business, you need a discrete course in ethics. And number two is if you're going to get a master's in business administration, you ought to at least have a foreign language competency. Well, you can't tell us. That's way region intrusion into university governance. We passed that both amendments 9-7. I had the votes lined up. I always wondered if they ever got that discrete course going. It looks like they didn't. So I would say that we should have no tuition through grade 14, technical college or the university.
Okay, first 2 years of college or technical.
Technical.
College.
And we ought to bite the bullet and finance that.
And any restructuring you would do right now?
Well, yes, I would restructure. If I was a potentate, the Cadillac in our educational system are the Volk schools. Non-elected boards, you realize that their faculty makes more in annual salaries than the faculty of the four-year baccalaureate institutions. They spend money like drunken sailors, and they always buy off labor, it's the labor thing, and a business, they want a customized program for 20 employees, they do it, and sometimes they didn't charge the cost of instruction. And they sit there, and that's one of the mistakes we made. We should add elected boards. The big chasm in education in Wisconsin is between our high schools and our Volk schools. It's not with our universities. I got on the regents and, the Wisconsin Policy Research Institute, those right-wingers, they were driving me nuts, but they were right on a couple things. We didn't have a lot of advanced placement credits. I raised hell at the regents, and the university responded tremendously. There are kids coming to university and having 17 credits in advanced placement earned in high school, counting towards You don't have that in the Volk school. This is an old statistic, but I'm sitting there in the Volk district around Madison. I don't know how many hundred high school graduates, how many thousand. Must have been 8,000 high school graduates in this Volk school. That it says only 100 had advanced placement credits, and most of it was note-taking, keyboarding, and they don't want anything to do with the tool stealers. So over in Milwaukee, you got these kids absolutely. Our schools have to change. We need to teach applied math, applied at the 4th or 5th grade. We need to keep those kids not 20% of their waking hours, but 80%. And by the 6th grade, they're into this vocational track like they do in much of Europe. Tech prep and advanced placement, and they'll be starting to have work experiences and go to school so that applied learning makes sense to them. Theoretical algebra and English literature for guys like you and I. And so what do we got? We got this retrain the adult population. They're 35, been alcoholic, been in prison once or twice, beat up a couple wives, and we're going to give them a grant to learn how to weld. Nick said, good.
No.
It doesn't work. And so these kids need to come right out of high school and glide into that Volk school. Many of them with advanced standing credits. But the Volk school, oh no, you can't teach it. Our curriculum is so distinctive, and it's a lot of bullshit. And that is the chasm. And so I would take the state superintendent. I'm not sure we need to elect it anymore. I'd take the state Volk board and have it gubernatorially appointed or elected some region, and it would sit over the Volk system and our K-12 system.
Now, of course, the person who represented that would be up in arms here for you using the word Volk.
Right.
It's the technical college system now.
And now they play sports all over the country, and you ought to see how they waste money.
Is there a rivalry here? I mean, as there was between the old state system and the University of Wisconsin? And now
we created the Volk system, and we created them with non-elected boards, and old Mitby and all those guys said, well, it's too big, who'd ever run? And
that was Norman Mitby.
Norman Mitby. So you understand the terrible scenario by which you got to have 2 women, 2 labor, 2 handicapped, 2 this and that, to point to those boards. And they're anonymous. And they're waltzed by their boards, and they put this levy of 400 million on property in the state, and the public schools get all the credit for it. And nobody knows, and they go in front of them county boards, and they're sitting there sleeping. They don't know voc ed from holding the head or tech prep or whatever, and they give them a slick slideshow, and away she goes. They were building.
That's the county contribution.
Right, and they got to go to the local director, and then drive through the state and see all of the branch offices they built. Got one in Shawano, got one in Clintonville, got one in Wittenberg. They built one in Niagara, and it's just essentially classroom space. And we should have used our high schools at night. But we got a voc center, and what do they teach? How to serve wine, how to crochet, how to knit and this, and then a couple academic programs, but there's no technical. It's a lot of computer stuff. Use the high school computers. They're right there. And they build all those centers. And they cost millions. And you go down the street during the school day in Clintonville, and there are 10 cars there, and you could fire a cannon down the hall. And the same thing in Shawano. And we got that all superstructure opposed, and nobody can be against voc ed. I am the greatest proponent of voc ed. I voted for the damn thing.
They were on the board, too.
Right, and nobody can touch them. And they always pull out organized labor in the business community. And our secondary schools, our vocational programs are terrible. And the reason I voted for that system was, being all those people said, no, vocational education is expensive, and we're going to work with the high schools, and the 16 to 18-year-olds can come to our voc school free of charge. As soon as they got in place, they said, well, and we had a couple lawsuits and stuff, and they, okay, if you want to come, it costs you $4,000 a student. What secondary school can afford that? Bring your teachers over here. And that's the chasm for a re-emergent America. We must have a high-skilled, high-performing, uniquely empowered, innovative, creative, effective, productive workforce that can compete with the rest of the world. We're deep yogurt. And you don't do it with the present system. Recycling people at the age of 35 that don't have time to study and think. And I have a cousin, Caroline, folks came over on a boat from Switzerland, age of 22, he's got, he's a certified electrician. That doesn't mean he can't get a PhD in sociology. But that guy's off and running.
Got to wrap up here.
Okay.
Do you think you've succeeded helping the little guy?
I feel that I've helped. I've helped individuals, but this last 6-8 years have been kind of depressing. It's so structural, and I have no voice, and I have such strong feelings that it's hard to watch where it's going. Now, I believe that within the next 5 years, we got to create jobs. What jobs? What skills? I mean, our truck is our skill. We export weapons. We don't create anything anymore. We have nothing to sell the rest of the world. The presumption that the Chinese and the Japanese and the Germans and the Asians are stupid, and now what we've done is 9/11, we've cut off their immigration so they come to our universities and hopefully stay with us and create intellectual wealth. So we aren't growing our own engineers. We aren't growing in our own technology. We aren't growing in our own skill. Oh, we're the greatest country in the world, innovation, creativity. What a mess up, balderdash. We lived off the Jewish people before Second World War. We lived off Werner Braun and all those guys after the Second World War. And we lived off the Asians and the Indians. 25% of the people in the Silicon Valley are from India. And now they're putting the research institutes over there. Our companies. So what are we going to sell? Well, on the bright side, And it's hard to say that in today's environment, but I've been married to the same girl for 44 years. There's not a second I didn't love her. Not one. And it was never up for grabs. And we were going to have a large family. I wouldn't advise that today. And we had 8. I was shooting for 12, but I wore out. But the point is, the kids, because of their mother, hopefully I backstopped it, they're all doing really well. 6 of them are married, 7th one gonna, first time marriages. Got 24 grandchildren, and my sons are better fathers than I was. That's good.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. Oh, and they all got educations in Wisconsin. Thank you.